Hello and welcome to Team Reptile's My Wildlife Adventures. As a high school teacher, I'm always looking for opportunities to be able to get my students involved with the Team Reptile group. During the spring of 2012, I was fortunate enough to receive a grant and I was able to take a group of students up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We traveled over to Paradise, Michigan, which definitely lived up to its name for us. We had worked hard before we had made the trip to make some connections with staff over at Tequamanon Falls, as well as at Whitefish Bird Observatory. One of our big goals on this trip was to be able to work with these biologists over at Whitefish Point, where they were working with owls and collecting data on them. Our first day, however, we were going to get started with Teresa Neal, the park interpreter for Tequamanon Falls State Park. We had to get up early in the morning after a long drive, but we knew we were in for some excitement for the day.
Just straight style.
You look good.
Just wilderness style.
Teresa Neal was kind enough to meet with us so that she could take us on a tour of the area.
Yeah, my name is Teresa. I'm actually the park interpreter here at Tequamanon Falls. So technically it's my job to take people out into the woods to go and see things. Quite often I'm not very good at bringing in moose or bear or wildlife because that's extremely difficult. And I'm sure, as you know, many of the wildlife photographers that do come here, they camp here for weeks at a time. And they hang out in blinds in full camouflage for days with the hopes of seeing a bear or something come up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out and explore some of the habitat where these critters live, and hopefully we'll get to see signs of them or maybe get to see something along the way. We also have a lot of really good plants and wildflowers that are starting to open too that are native to the Upper Peninsula. And flowers and plants are nice because they hold still for us. So you can practice all your photography skills that way too, and videography skills. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the lower falls, which is only a couple miles away. Usually I drive pretty slow because there's critters in the morning in the campground, and so we'll kind of do a little lap through there. And then we're going to walk around the lower falls a little bit, probably about 1.5 miles to maybe 2 miles, and see what we can see.
One of my goals when we were at the lower falls was to try to find some amphibian life. I convinced some of the high schoolers to start flipping over logs with me, always making sure to put them back once we were done, and we searched around for some salamander life. Fortunately, it didn't take too long, and we found a very cool animal.
We were just wandering around. We've been fortunate enough to hike around here with Teresa Neal, who is the park interpreter for Tequamanon Falls State Park. And we were actually walking along a little bridge and little path, and Teresa and I were searching for salamanders, so was Alex Chase, and Teresa and I hadn't had any luck yet, and Alex called us over and he had found a redback salamander, which this is a really cool species of salamander because of the fact that they are what is called lungless. They have no lungs, and although they start with what are called gill buds in the turn into frogs. Well, salamander larva develops into a salamander. And generally what happens is a salamander will lay its eggs in the water just like a frog will, and it will over time develop and go through metamorphosis and come onto land. And with the redback salamander instead, they actually develop within their eggs that the adult female lays on land, generally in or underneath a log. And sometimes it's even said that a redback salamander, not always, but redback salamanders will stick around and guard the eggs. But as I was saying earlier, it's really cool because of the fact that they don't have to have lungs. It's one of the reasons they're successful. They actually absorb oxygen through their skin, entirely through their skin. It's also one of the reasons, though, that they can drown really quickly if they end up in water, in a puddle of water, or that they can't crawl out of, or an oversaturated area. One of the important things, if you ever handle, which when you handle salamanders, one of the concerns, and you may have noticed that I let him crawl on my hand rather than touching him a lot with my skins. We all have oils on our skins that can be harmful to amphibians. When you let something go, a lot of people tend to think, hey, I'll just pick up the log, set it back down, set the log on, because when we found it, we lifted the log up. Well, instead, a better way to make sure you don't hurt the animal by crushing it is to lay the log down, gently set the salamander down, see if they'll jump here, and then allow them to crawl back under the log.
One of the other really cool things we got to see while we were at the lower falls was a number of bald eagles. It was really easy to be able to spot the adult bald eagles because of their white head. Immature bald eagles, on the other hand, are generally all brown with a black beak, which makes it a lot more difficult to spot those in the trees. After seeing the bald eagles, we decided to hike around a little bit more. We didn't have a whole lot of luck seeing many other animals there at the lower falls. We got to see a couple squirrels, which was kind of cool. But other than that, really not a whole lot of wildlife. But boy, was the scenery just absolutely amazing. The students, myself, and Mrs. Moss, I mean, everybody you just couldn't get enough of it. Just an amazing experience for all of us. And for some of the people, this was the first time they've ever been up here, and it may be the only time they come up to Quamanon their whole life. Just something you really can't pass up if you get the opportunity. Although it was tough to drag ourselves away from those beautiful falls, we knew we had other places to go. Our next spot was a bit more secluded and not quite as well known.
This is the real part of Tequamanon Falls State Park, our 48,000 acres. About half is comprised of this peatland habitat. So what we're going to be walking through, we're going to be walking on these old sand dune ridges, right? And that is from a historical time, probably 10 to 15,000 years ago, when Lake Superior was a much bigger lake, and it was actually the old shoreline of Lake Superior. So we're going to be walking old sand dune ridges, and then in the low spots on either side of the sand dunes are where the peatlands are. So we're going to, sometimes those are referred to as bogs when a peatland has a bunch of water in it and certain carnivorous plants that we'll check out today. And some of them are a little bit more filled in and they'll start to have trees growing in them and things. The peatlands are a great spot for many different wildlife to hang out and seek refuge because as you'll see, it's really tough to walk through a peatland because it's super thick vegetation. Usually it's quite wet, so if you stand there long enough, you will slowly start to sink. So it's a great spot for things like those sandhill cranes you saw earlier on the side of the road, big tall birds. This is where they nest, is out here, because it's a lot harder for predators to get to them. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask. We're going to walk the sand dune ridge out to Clark Lake, which is one of our 3 glacial lakes that we have out here. Very shallow, but one of the nice watering holes out in the North Country. All right, any questions before we go? And we'll see a lot of them as we walk in these sandy dune areas. What you have to do is find a little ant, grab it without killing it, and stick it inside one of these pits and watch. All right, so all of our goals.
Oh.
You see it?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's got it.
oh!
Oh no.
Little ant! And now if the ant gets out, we all decide that's natural selection and we let it go. So the antlion hangs out at the bottom, and it has these little pinchers that come out, and it waits for an ant to walk by and get stuck in its trap, right? And then it goes like this and tries to get the ant. So we know this one is active. This is what an antlion looks like.
Ooh.
You see him? This is a little antlion. So they have these little pinchers on the front, and they usually scoot into these little holes butt first, and they dig themselves into the sand. And this is actually the larva of a little fly that actually looks a lot like a tiny little dragonfly. So similar to like how many insects start out as a larva stage, this is the larval stage of the antlion. It's very cool. The pinchers, everybody thinks that the pinchers pinch, but they don't pinch us. They just like. And if we were to sit here and watch, if we had all day, it takes them about 30 minutes to make one of those pits. So all these little pits have little antlines in them in different stages. This one's pretty big, so apparently some of them must overwinter as larvae and then turn into adults as the season goes on and stuff.
That was so cool learning about the antlion. Most of us had never seen anything like that before. It didn't take long after we started hiking to find something else really cool with Teresa.
And this, instead of having hard ground like what we're walking on, this entire sort of kettle hole is filled with sphagnum moss or peat moss. Now, Native Americans used to actually use peat moss in their kids' diapers because it's super absorbent. So you can take a whole chunk of it and you can squeeze and all sorts of water comes out. It's actually quite absorbent. So this was also used to address wounds back in like the Civil War because it has kind of antimicrobial properties, and then it was very absorbent for blood and stuff too, blood and pus. So if you want to walk out here, you can kind of get the sensation of bouncing on a bog a little bit. So, come on in. Moss is still quite wet. And it's very good at retaining its moisture as well, which is why a lot of critters do like to hang out here, because it stays nice and wet. So if you stand there long enough, you can see he starts to get wetter and wetter and wetter, especially when you go out into the deeper sections. So what we do when we're walking on it, unfortunately, is you're kind of killing this little section, so we always just do a little loop and hang out a little bit. The more you walk through a bog, the sphagnum moss takes a really long time to grow.
Once we left the area with the sphagnum moss, we decided to head over to another area where we got to do something that I absolutely love to do, and that's look for amphibian life. I knew there was a good chance I might be able to find a mink frog here, but I might have to search through a few green frogs in the process.
The cross bands on the back, he's got the spots like the mink frog would have, but those cross bands on the back, and then look at your toe. Yeah, it doesn't go all the way to that fourth toe. I don't know if anybody can zoom in on that. The fourth toe, the webbing should go all the way out to this joint where my thumbnail is. And it doesn't for a mink frog. And the legs have cross bands, which is a sign of a green frog.
While I was letting this one go, one of the other students happened to find the species that I was looking for.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I don't know. It's got the...
Captured that.
Deep.
So good.
I actually played the mink frog.
Oh, you got that call on there? I'm pretty sure this is a mink frog.
What is that thing?
See how the legs, remember those cross bands I was talking about? On the legs here, there are more spots. There's no cross bands. See all the, like it's more of a spot there? That is a sign that it's a, yeah, it's got a, it's not as musty as I expected it to be. Crazy book. Oh yeah, yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, it's secreting it now because the way I'm holding it. Yep. So you can even see the bumps there? That's where it's secreting. You can even see some of the... Oh, I know what else we can say about them. Anyone know if it's male or female?
I don't know.
It is a, can you tell?
Male.
Yep.
Because
You know how it's a male? Yep. Because
So now that we had caught both a green frog and a mink frog, we decided it was time to move on. After we let the frogs go, we got right back out on the trail, and it didn't take too long before we found a big old mammal catching some rays out on this beautiful day. Although we originally spotted this American beaver through our binoculars, we really wanted to be able to get a closer look at it. We decided to hike around and see if we could find a better spot.
really close or no? Because mine don't show too close.
The North American beaver is a very large, web-footed semi-aquatic mammal that is actually classified as a rodent. An adult of this species usually weighs between 40 and 50 pounds, but they can actually get to be about 70 pounds or more. Beavers are strict vegetarians and often feed off aquatic plants, but as we all know, they also love to eat wood, especially the soft tissue within a tree. After we watched this beaver for a little bit and probably ended up annoying it some too, we decided to move on. Our next stop was on a platform where Teresa told us a little bit about peat moss, gave us an idea of how thick it was here, and also gave us some information about some unique vegetation that's in this area.
So this time of year we can see a couple carnivorous plants that hang out in our bog here. So this is considered to be an open peatland because it's got open water in the back. A closed peatland is where the peat moss has covered the entire thing. So like that first one that we came by was a closed peatland, right? So this moss grows pretty darn slow, all of this peat moss. It takes about 100 years to grow roughly 3 or 4 inches. So it starts on the bottom and then just kind of works its way up. So all of this moss, if you were to come back in 1,000 years, this could be a closed bog because eventually they will connect both sides. So some of the plants that live here have to be very keen on having acidic roots, basically, because all of this water that's here just stays here. It's all precipitation, so there's no inflow or outflow. So after the water sits here for a while, it gets really stagnant and it gets really acidic because of the plants that are here. So one of the plants that you guys had pointed out was they have all these red pitchers. These are pitcher plants, and you can see these red tubes, right? And if you can get kind of close to one, you girls have them by you. You guys have them by you. You can gently stick your finger in it, like your pinky finger or the next one, and you can feel these little hairs on it. Those little hairs, actually their job is to trap insects, right? So some of the pitchers are dead from last year, some of the new ones are starting to pop up. And these little hairs all point downward. So to a fly, this pitcher plant gives off a really sweet nectary kind of smell. And the fly kind of crawls in. And these hairs are pointing down, so as the fly goes down, it can't back up. So the fly goes down and down and down, and then pretty soon, this pitcher plant actually holds water. And so the fly keeps going, and then it slips and it drowns. And the plant actually digests the fly using its juices way down deep inside. So if we sacrifice one, we will see, if you sacrifice one and you pour it out in your hand, there's actually quite a bit of water inside, even though again it hasn't rained in a few days. And inside there's mosquito larvae swimming around. And there's actually certain insects that only lay their eggs inside pitcher plants. So it's a pretty cool little plant to have. One of the other things that's around here that I see nobody harvested, which is surprising because usually they do, are cranberries. These are cranberries from last year.
And those grow well here, right?
So all of these tiny little plants with the tiny little leaves are cranberry plants, and those grow well here.
Next, we made our way over to one of the many lakes that falls within the Tequamanon Falls State Park area called Clark Lake. Some of my students quickly noticed there was a dark coloration to the water. Teresa explained to us that the dark coloration of the water is caused by tannin, which is leached from the cedar, spruce, and hemlock trees around the lake. Tannin is a natural organic material that is a byproduct of nature's fermentation process. This actually occurs as water passes through the peaty soil and decaying vegetation, and then it makes its way into larger bodies of water. Clark Lake is an absolutely amazing habitat to many species of animals, including the black bear.
Black bears are pretty small. An average black bear is about 150 pounds. For a small adult, and they get up to like 300 pounds is a really big black bear. But typically when they stand up straight on their back legs, they're about 5.5 feet tall, so about as tall as I am, that's it. And then when they're down on the ground, it's just like a really big, about the size of a German Shepherd, I would say, height-wise. So they're not super big bears compared to other bears in the world, but their den is around here. Any idea? That. Good. So a lot of people are expecting like a cave or something, you know?
Yeah. To be honest, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but when you think about how big a black bear is, you know, it's got to be just big enough for them to fit. So if you look around the side of a sand dune, the side of these sand dunes that we've been kind of hiking up and around is perfect. So you can check out inside and see if there is. It's pretty small. I can get kids to fit in there. I can fit in there. But you get pretty darn dirty.
I would if I wasn't wearing them.
Yeah.
Kendall, can I just shove you in there?
Yeah, so even though I never saw the bear because it was before I was here, I can guarantee you that this was a female bear's den.
Crazy.
So do you have any idea as to why this is for sure a female bear den? It's small. People always say the curtains. It's clean. How do I know this is a female bear's den? For sure, guaranteed. No, this is not a female.
Because they have the cubs.
They have the cubs, which means they need the bear den. So I was telling them I can actually fit in there if I can like back up and then curl myself up and I'd fit. So it was about a little bigger than I am. That's how big it is down in there. And the reason I know it's the females is because she's the one with the cubs, and male black bears don't really build dens. So the male black bears, when it's time for them to sleep for the winter time, they'll just like go curl up next to a rock, they'll go curl up next to a tree, and just let the snow fall on top of them. Because the reason they're hibernating, even though it's not truly hibernation, the reason they're going to sleep is not because they're cold. Black bears have a thick layer of fat, they have really thick fur, they're totally warm. It's because they can't find food, right? Because in the wintertime, what bears like to eat, actually, are grubs and insects and bugs. They like to eat vegetation. They like mushrooms. They'll eat baby fawns. They'll eat baby rabbits. Anything, they eat anything. They're like big, whatever, big omnivores. But in the wintertime, it's really difficult to find food for everybody, especially something that needs that much food every day to survive. So that's why black bears do a winter sleep. Now, I was telling some people how we found this. It was actually my boss, when he was the interpreter here, actually came out and found this. And he was on a snowshoe hike out here. And he just happened, this is what he does. He looks around for bear dens and random crap he can find in the fall. And one of the things he found was the bear den, and the bear was in there. You could see this black fur, and you'd see moving like this, right? So they decided that they would come back in the spring to check out the bear den after the bear had left. So what I like to tell people is, like, if you went into a bear den and you were in that situation, right, where it was wintertime and the bear's in there, the bear's not truly asleep, though. So if my boss were to go up to that bear and be like, hey, the bear all of a sudden starts breathing heavier, right? Because what it's doing is it's breathing at about, just very slow. Its heart rate goes way down. But its body temperature stays relatively high. So that's why it's not a true hibernator. Now, like a woodchuck, if you went up to a woodchuck, and you're like, hey, woodchuck, wake up. Nothing. You could kick him, you could punch him, you could poke him, nothing. But if you do that to a bear, you better start running, because that bear's going to slowly start to wake back up, and it will be angry when it comes out of its den. So it's not unheard of for a bear to actually leave its den in February, check stuff out, and then go back into its den. But typically it's the females that build the dens because they have the cubs. When cubs are born, they're about the size of a Coke can, super small, bald, no hair, totally ugly, making all this ruckus. And then they sit there and feed. They drink milk all winter long off of their mom. The mom does not poop or pee the entire time she's in this den. Before a bear goes into hibernation or winter sleep, it eats some very indigestible stuff. Bark, roots, gross stuff. It goes through its digestive tract and then kind of gets stuck there. And so it's basically a giant butt plug. So when a bear comes out of its winter sleep, the very first thing that comes out is about a 3-inch plug that it finally just lets go, and then it goes ahead and goes to the bathroom and goes and finds some food. So you'd have to hold it for about 6 months if you were a black bear. So pretty interesting facts about the black bear. Now, after she has her babies in January, they hang out with her in the den till April-ish, May, and then they all come out, they forage together. They don't go back to the den until the fall, and then she builds a new den for her and her cubs. So the cubs are actually in there for 2 years in a den with the female, and then the following spring she kicks them out. And they're teenager bears. And those are the bears that are often in bird feeders and garbage cans, because they just got kicked out from their mother. They have to find their own way. And those are the problem bears that sometimes have to get trapped and relocated. So it's not usually the old-timer bears. But we do have quite a few bear here. We probably have they're estimating between 1 and 2 bear per square mile in our park. So probably about 100 to 200 bears in Tequamanon Falls, and about 10,000 in the Upper Peninsula. So there's a lot of bears. Yet no one ever sees them. Very rarely. So, any questions about the den or anything? I realize it's not a bat cave kind of thing, but really, typically the black bears.
It had been an incredible day exploring Tequamanon Falls State Park with Teresa, which we were extremely thankful for, but it was now time to head out. We knew we would need to grab some food and rest up a bit before our big night at Whitefish Point Bird Observatory. We were fortunate enough while we were up here in the UP to be able to stop by Whitefish Bird Observatory and meet up with Chris and Nova, who are 2 seasonal employees here at the observatory, and they actually do some banding of the birds that come through. So we're going to talk a little bit with them about what they do and how they go about it. All right, Chris, how about telling us a little bit about what you guys do here when you go out to band the birds?
Well, we have mist nets set up, which are nets specifically designed for catching birds. We run all night for the owls. We start about a half hour after sunset, close a half hour before sunrise. And what we're doing, it's a long-term project that WPBO, Whitefish Point Bird Observatory, has been running since about, I think, 1984. So we're just trying to monitor and document the owl migration through Whitefish Point. We'll go out every 45 minutes through the night checking the nets. We bring all the owls back here. They're fitted with a metal band which is issued by the USGS. It's the bird banding lab out of Maryland. We take measurements, wing, tail, weight. We check them for body condition. And unlike the water bird count and the hawk flight, you can't document this migration through visual observations. They're nocturnal, they're hard to detect. So this is really the only way to really do a pretty thorough job of documenting the owl migration through Whitefish Point. It's really, it's the most diverse and most extensive spring migration in North America. 9 species regularly occur here, right, 4 owls. And we run the owl migration monitoring spring, summer, and fall. There's more and more sites in North America developing. It's been, in the last 10 years, saw wet banding specifically has really exploded. Sorry?
Northern saw-whet owl is the smallest
saw-whet
owl in the northern regions, and that's the most migratory, it seems, of the North American owls. So it's a pretty easy owl for people to start with when they start owl banding. So there's a lot of sites that are just devoted to catching saw-whets throughout the U.S. Yeah, so all the bans to all banding stations in North America, which is U.S. and Canada, are issued by USGS Bird Banding Lab in Maryland. And each band has a particular number on it that is, different. So when you put the band on the leg of the owl, it's basically like a social security number. There's not going to be any other band with the same number anywhere else in the country, which is very helpful, because if we catch an owl that has a band already on its leg, then we note down the number. We don't take the band off. We just take down the number and measurements, and we send that into the bird banding lab, and they can tell us where the bird was originally banded, and we can get a sense for where it has migrated and its movement patterns.
So these are the smallest bands we really use here. It's for northern saw-whet owls. And this is the largest, which is a lock-on band. That would be for great horned or snowy owl. And I don't know if you can see it, but there are there's the individual number. And so in doing the banding, we not only get a number of the owls coming through, get a sense of the migration, but you also find out where you can find out where the birds go to spend the winter. Sometimes we get them back on the reports from breeding grounds. You get wild longevity records.
And the kind of an important thing about this is these bands, they weigh 0.2 of a gram, and they do not hurt the owls in any way. It's basically just like having a little bracelet on, or a watch band in this case. And we make sure every owl that we put a band on, that the band can freely move this way, back and forth, and up and down. So it's not constricting the owl in any way. And over all the returns we've ever had, which are owls that we've captured that already have a band on their leg, we've never had any problems.
And some of the saw-whets are what we catch the most of. Since 2007, the average has actually been over 700 a season, and we generally will catch about 40 birds, saw-whets that have already been banded, and we get more returns from other sites. And the saw-whets have shown up from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, down to Alabama, been recaptured at their nest up in Quebec near the Hudson Bay. They've ended up in Boston, Virginia. We get a lot of turns with Wisconsin, so they're really dispersing in every direction from here, which this central location of their territory, their breeding grounds, we get some really interesting returns back from them.
How many, you said you've had some recurring birds, or they've been banded for it. Have you guys had actual recurring birds from this site that you
Yeah,
found?
yeah, we do. We get
Probably 20.
yeah, a season probably. Yeah.
Any for numerous years, more than just 2 years?
Yeah.
We had
Really?
one for what, 3 years?
One was 4.
4.
One returned 4 times.
And one was in the same net within 2 hours of where we had banded it. Probably what, 4 years previously?
Yeah.
And others, I mean, they return a month different, in captures. Like we say we banded it March 30th one year, we've caught it April 30th another year, where other birds seem to be right at the same time.
Any big surprises ever in the nets?
Chuckwill's widow, which is a more southern bird. It's a nightjar, and there's only 2 records for the UP, and both were from here during the owl banding. There's been one hanging for several years down in Bergen County during the summer, but it's a real rare bird on the UP. Obviously, just 2 records.
For the smaller owls, the boreal owls and the saw-whet owls, we put them in these little huts when we're getting ready to band them. They get to wait in here until we have a chance to band them. And these are just, we call them little owl hotels. They have carpeting. They're very fancy, and we can write the information we need to out on here.
This was such an incredible opportunity for myself as well as the high schoolers to be able to be right in the same room with Chris and Nova as they first tagged these owls and then recorded the data. This study is so important for all of these species of birds that Chris and Nova, as well as the other biologists, work with there at Whitefish Bird Observatory. And even though it was a late night for us, staying up after midnight just to wait for these guys to be able to actually bring some owls in, it was well worth it. Definitely a first for many of us, including me, to be able to be up close like that with owls. And even after all the work I've done with Michigan wildlife my whole life, I had never in my life seen a saw-whet owl, and then to be able to actually be right next to it was just amazing for us.
Don't bite too much. And they're cute. And we get lots of them. This is a particularly large one. She's 105 grams. So we say they weigh about as much as a flying stick of butter. It's about the same. And, it's a spider web. Huh. How'd you get that caught in there? Wow, that's really caught. They have really, really soft feathers. See, you can hear their little click, that's their bill. They make a sound with their bill. But when their feathers flap, you don't hear anything. And that's partially because they have this fringe, which you can really see on the outside of this feather, which allows the air to pass through. And they also have, all their feathers are very soft, which also helps the air to pass through. And you can actually, yeah, they're really soft.
That's cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
But we also have to remember it's, of course, a wild owl, even though it is being very docile at the moment.
Spinning his head.
Yeah. The other thing, they can turn their heads 3/4 of the way around.
Even you did that stare, Mr. Ashley.
I think it might be looking at, I don't know if my lens is reflecting, but
No, and as we were saying, unlike with the water birds and the hawks, we can't really do visual counts on these. And even during the day, I mean, you see how small they are? They like to roost in very dense, tree cover. So we can band, on average 700 a spring, and we're lucky if you see 2 otherwise. So, there's no real way to document these guys real accurately without the banding. And they are great education birds. We banded as many as 112 in a night. The first night of the season this year we banded 94.
You can see their wingspan's a lot larger than just their body. We should show the black light. So this owl doesn't have what we call molt. It only all of its primaries and secondaries, which are its flight feathers, are all the same age. But on this other bird, it has 2 generations, which means it's older than 1 year. And you can see it under the black light.
So there's all these white ones in the middle. They're retained. They're feathers that were not replaced. They're a year older than these ones that are showing all that pink.
Yeah, the pink really fluoresces. Yeah.
Crazy. So this bird was born in the summer of 2010 from that molt pattern.
Is yours female too?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are both females.
Both
So
females?
females are actually larger than males.
What is the, I don't know if you guys have already mentioned this, but what is the average lifespan and what is, so far, according to your records?
It's
what's
hard
the-
to say what the average one is, but someone actually from Long Point in Ontario just this past fall set the wild longevity record. It was a 10-year. It was over 10 years,
Wow.
which for a bird
But
this
it's,
size is.
yeah, it's hard to know because we catch so many more first-year birds, and then something usually happens to weed those out by their second year.
Okay.
But you can see on this one, these are their talons, and this is how they catch their prey. And they don't. I mean, they don't eat insects. Most people think they do. They actually mostly eat mice and voles. And we actually caught an owl once in a net, and it still had a vole in its talons. And the vole weighed half of what the saw-whet weighed. The vole weighed 40 grams, and the saw-whet weighed about 80. So that's a pretty big meal. But yeah, their talons are pretty sharp, like little needles.
They got to see.
And their ears actually are located on both sides of their head, and they're asymmetrical, so they have like 3D hearing. So one ear is tipped a little forward, the other one's tipped a little back, and also the one ear is tipped like up a little bit, and the other one's tipped down. So you can see their eyes don't actually move in their head side to side like ours do. So they have to turn their head. It's like binocular vision. And when they hear something, they move their head until it's reaching both ears at the same time. So then they know they're looking exactly at the prey.
These guys are particularly good. They're cavity nesters, so they almost, like when you're putting in the can, they'll actually push off your hand to get in there, like they think they're getting safe, silhouettes and boreals.
And of course the cans have little air.
And what do you do with the big owls? Do they go in a can too?
Coffee cans.
All right.